We are in Genesis chapter 13, and in chapter 13 here we are basically seeing in the last chapter that Abraham was on his way back heading north from Egypt into the Negev in the southern part of Israel, and he's going to move up a little bit further north to Bethel tonight as well. And in so doing, we're going to see some, reconfirmation of the covenant and just a living out of the promise. So let's begin here in verse 1. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. So, as we kind of are picking up on what we talked about last week, he has just been blessed abundantly by Pharaoh in Egypt. Even though he was the one who really was not living in faith, not trusting God, God blesses him anyway. And so from the Negev, he is continuing up north to Bethel, where it says here that he had previously built an altar to the Lord. We saw that back in chapter 12, verse 8. And what he was doing at that time, if you recall, was he built that altar when he was ultimately looking for guidance, as he had just moved into the land of Canaan, and a famine is about to happen. We don't know for sure. Perhaps Abram made this kind of a religious tour to make amends for his lack of faith in Egypt. Just speculation. Again, no way of knowing. All that we do know is that he's coming off of this, you might even say, sin in Egypt, and he's going back to the place where it all began, where he had first made this altar. Now, to give you an idea of where he has been traveling, you can see here on the far right, the red line following up. He was called out of Ur. He went to Haran. We see that his father dies. He leaves. He goes south then, all the way through the land of Israel. The entire land. Now, you might say, well, man, why did he go all the way up and then back down? Well, it's a desert. It's really impassable for the most part. And so he is taking what is called in part the King's Highway and then down to the Road of the Patriarchs. The Road to the Patriarchs is that main path. If you recall when we were going through some of the geography of Israel, it is a rocky, very difficult place to navigate. And there are only certain paths that you can go to get from one place to the other. And so it's almost a sure thing that he was following the path of the Road of the Patriarchs down through the entire promised land here. We'll talk more about that later. In verse 5 it says, Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Lot. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. So Abram said to Lot, Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Well, there's a lot here. Number one, I guess, if you look at verse 7, when it says the Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land. I mentioned this last week because it was also mentioned last week in chapter 12. It makes no sense to include this. I mean, if I was a teacher again and somebody wrote a paper and they were telling me a story of what's going on, and then and by the way, these guys are living here. It's like, why are you telling me that now? I'd put a big X through that and say, new paragraph, different paragraph. There's a reason that that's here. So I mentioned last week, they're trying to tie these two chapters together. However, we also need to remember that chapter breaks were not in the original text either. There's a reason he's mentioning this 2 times. And frankly, I think one of the biggest reasons that he's mentioning it is because who are the Canaanites? These are the descendants of Noah. Okay, Noah's son Ham specifically. The very descendants that Noah actually cursed because of Ham's sin. Remember, he cursed Canaan, not Ham. These are the cursed people that Noah had cursed. And I think what we're going to see is a juxtaposition here of the blessed people and the unblessed people, the cursed ones. I could be wrong. That's why it's being brought up. But to me, it makes sense that right now, as we're seeing this very calling of Abraham, kind of tying this with what we talked about last week, the beginning of the call, and also pointing out that the cursed ones are still going to be there, and these are going to be the enemies. But that Noah's curse is indeed being lived out as well. And so we're seeing both lines being traced here. Again, speculation, but I believe that Abram had learned a good lesson when he was in Egypt there. He had been living, it seems, by his own will, by his own choices, by his own desires, to some extent, in maybe going down to Egypt. Maybe he was supposed to stay in that land. The Bible doesn't say that God told him to go to Egypt for that. And so, I believe that God is growing Abraham here. He's growing him in his faith, as he does with us in our lives. We go through trials, we go through troubles, and we end up growing through them. It's not fun, it's hard. Sometimes we even question God. Why? Why are you allowing this to happen? As I'm sure maybe Abraham did when God called him to go to Canaan. He gets there and there's a famine. Why? But I think that he was growing Abraham. And so now he comes back to the land, and the first thing we see are more troubles. Arguments. Because of blessings. Now, he's going to let Lot choose where he wants to live. This is not a man who is selfish or greedy. This is a man who is concerned about others. This is a man who I think has grown in his faith. A man who the Lord is able to work with. Now, we don't know for sure why, but some have suggested that he is exercising extra faith here. Because we know that Sarah is barren. The only reason we know that is the text has told us that. There's no reason that we should really know. I mean, Sarah, this is early on in his life for the most part. And some suggest that he thinks that his property, his possessions, all of these things that he had, all these people he came out of Haran with, now he's coming back with more from Egypt. Who is he going to give this stuff to? And he might think, well, Lot. He's my nephew. He's my descendant. I'm going to pass this on to my family. Again, the text doesn't say this. But some have, questioned that this might be what's going on in his mind. I'm going to come back to that. Well, Lot is going to look around, and he is going to choose the Jordan Valley, which looks like the Garden of God. Very fertile near the river. Now today, it does not look anything like it did at this time, because when the Lord is going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, everything changes. And it's going to become a much more barren and desolate place. But here it looks like the garden of God. And like I said, it just doesn't look like that today at all. What I want to point out, though, is just the juxtaposition between Lot and Abraham. Now, I don't want to, throw Lot under the bus too much, because we do know Peter tells us that he was a righteous man. But I know a lot of righteous people who I don't really want to hang out with today. I believe that because God is merciful, patient, gracious, and forgiving, that they will be in heaven with me. But I don't like them. Sorry.
Dude, I'm right here.
Okay? Sorry. To me, I think Lot would have been one of those. I would not have had much respect for Lot, I don't believe. Maybe I'm wrong. But it looks to me like he is falling into the worldly trap of material possessions. I can tell you this, if my uncle said, hey, choose whatever, I'd give him the best. Lot takes the best. And I find it pretty interesting that in taking the best, he actually is going to choose the worst. I can't help but wonder if that's not what we do today in our own lives. That there are all these carrots that the devil dangles in front of us sometimes, and we think that, this is going to be awesome, this is going to be great, but we allow those blessings to be turned into curses. Because it isn't that the things are bad, but that it's to have a heart for those things. And Lot clearly had a heart for those things. And when we have a heart for the things of this world, God sometimes blesses and we can have all of these things, but statistics show that people who have a lot of money are not as happy as poor people. Now, every poor person would say, no, they have all the fun, they get all of this, they get to travel, they get to have their nice homes and cars and boats and toys and whatever. Yeah, those things own you. To me, there's a lesson to be learned here. Because first thing you're going to see is that Lot is only going to camp near Sodom. But just like material possessions seem to do in our life, we can have this, I really would love to have one of those someday. It's near in our heart. And then we get it, and we're like caught up in it. It consumes our time and our thoughts and our money. And then one day we find out that that toy has become a curse. I see that that's what's going to happen here with Lot, as you will see, because soon afterward, in Genesis 14, verse 12, we're going to see that he's going to actually be in the city. He first faces Sodom, then he's and then he's in the gates. Facing, near, in. It sucks him in. And once he chooses to live in the city, his life is going to begin to take on the attitudes of the city. His attitude of the world. Sitting in the gates of a city means, and we'll see that in chapter 19, that's where influential people were. He's going to become very influential in this city. Well, when Abraham and Lot, their herdsmen, begin to quarrel. Notice it says they're herdsmen. It doesn't seem that they were quarreling. So that's not why Lot chose the better. But his herdsmen are. Some people say that this kind of takes you back to Cain and Abel, brothers arguing. And they end up having to separate. We also see the record here says that Abraham and Lot, he says, we are brothers. Well, they're not. That's an uncle and a nephew. But that's what the text says here, and it is brothers. Well, when it says that Lot looks at the garden, or looks down and he sees that it's like the garden of God, when he sees this, it is the exact same word that Eve did when she desired the fruit of the tree. It's a coveting, which may give us some indication of what could be in Lot's heart here. But what I love is that Abraham doesn't look towards anything. He lets Lot choose. And the reason that that's important is because of the theme that I think is going throughout this whole chapter in some ways. Lot is desiring, coveting. Abraham could care less. He's not looking at anything. His eyes are simply on God. He's not looking towards that thinking, oh man, Lot's going to pick that. He's not looking over here going, oh, how am I going to live in this? He doesn't look at anything but God. And it's actually God who has to then tell him and say, hey, look around you, because I'm going to give you all this land. And by the way, I think that also included then what Lot just took. I'm going to give you all of this. You didn't just give anything up, but in laying it down, you get to pick it all up. Because he didn't care. And that's what I've said many times here, that I know that I get kind of beat up by my wife sometimes on this one. Because she always thinks I'm picking on her or talking to her. Well, if the shoe fits. The problem is the shoe fits a lot of us, myself included, in this group. If the shoe fits you, I'm speaking to you. I've said many times about how we get so caught up in this world and what it has to offer, whether it be travels or toys. It makes no difference. When our eyes are on those things, when we are looking for those things, what we're really going to get is Lot's experiences. It doesn't mean that it's bad to travel or to have toys. Abraham is going to travel and get the toys, all the toys. But that wasn't a bad thing for Abraham. The difference is what he's looking at, where his heart is at. And so, again, it's not wrong to have possessions. It's wrong to have a heart for those possessions. It's wrong to not be willing to at any time lay them down. Abraham was willing to say, Lot, you take anything you want. I'll take the leftovers. I don't care. That's what I see standing out here with Abraham. Another interesting thing that just kind of a by the way type of thing is that I don't think it's an accident that with these material blessings, with the financial gain comes quarreling. It's not an accident that we see time and time again with almost any time somebody dies and there's an inheritance. It causes problems even among people who get along. That financial situations just bring it out, bring the ugly out. Abraham here has already been told that God, I'm going to give you this stuff. And your descendants are going to be like the dust of the earth, the stars of the sky. And rather than Abraham hanging on to his inheritance, he's willing to give it away. Lot, you can take whatever you want. I don't care. If you guys have to go through a situation like that someday in the future, maybe to divide up the goods, maybe remember Abraham. Ultimately, this chapter is going to teach us that between brothers, peace is much more important than worldly success. And I think the same is true with families, that peace is so much more important than whether you get Grandma's china or her silver and gold. Abraham was willing to sacrifice it all for the sake of peace. Notice this whole land is before Abraham. Like I said, I think that even included Lot's. When we give up the things of this world, let me tell you, you're gaining much more. For sure. Verse 10, Lot looked up and he saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt towards Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Like I said, it looked very different then than it does now. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, this cursed land, the land of the cursed people, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. A couple of things here. I want you to understand that Abraham has moved into hell as far as what people are concerned. Not only are the Canaanites in this area, but next week we're going to see the giants. The giants are living in this area too. Okay? So we'll talk about that more next week, but just know that for now. Anyway, in letting Lot go to the land of his choosing, it shows Abraham's faith that God was going to be faithful to his plan for his offspring without having to plot, to manipulate, to plan it out. Lot, you're going to be seeing later, is going to be captured, and Abraham is going to be the one that has to go and rescue him. It has been brought up, I think it was in the Bema podcast, I'm not sure, but while I don't agree with a lot of what their interpretations are, I know they were bringing up this idea that, again, maybe Abraham is exercising his faith, kind of coming back to this, because he's going to say, Lot, I'm going to let you have whatever. I'm going to let you go. Not only am I going to let you have whatever you want, but I'm going to let you go away from me. You're no longer going to be under my household, and I will no longer have anybody to give my inheritance to. And then we're going to see that Lot is going to be captured by these kings. And maybe they suggest that Abraham was thinking, I gave it up and God is bringing it back. Lot is going to, he's coming back under my household. God has provided a blessing. And only to have Lot go back to Sodom and take it away again. Again, that is pure speculation. I don't know. I know that was the take that they were taking on it. That more not to disparage Lot as much as it is to lift up Abraham and give him that faith of saying, hey, I'm laying everything down. Even Lot, I'm willing to let go. Much like you might say that you have to let a son or a daughter go at times. Somebody that's important to you. That you just have to put them in God's hands and let the Lord work with them. And whether that's what Abraham was thinking or not, that truth does ring loudly. Yeah. In chapter 15, it's going to open with Abraham not having a descendant to leave his inheritance to. And he's going to think that it's going to have to go to Eliezer, my servant, because that's the only one in his household. So the timing of it does seem to suggest that, he thought that Lot was gone. He's definitely thinking about it. Well, as I said, while Lot chooses the best for himself, Abraham waits for the Lord to tell him what he gets. I think that's also kind of piggybacking on what I just said, a good lesson here. You need to trust God, not your eyes. Sometimes that might even be your schedule. I try to practice that a lot, that when things don't go well with my schedule or my plans, to say, oh well, God knows. I've mentioned it before. There have been times that a speaking engagement gets canceled, and I'm, would think, oh man, what a bummer, and then I'm sick when that day comes up, or whatever. There are so many examples where it's better to just trust God, no matter what happens. We were hoping to go to St. Louis to pick up a mammoth for my museum here, and just getting drug along by this guy, and those plans fall through. And Tara was like, man, I was really looking forward to going to St. Louis with you. And it's like, God's got a plan. He knows best. And so whatever it is, I think it's good for us to put this into practice, that we don't need to choose, but we let God choose. Let God make the one that decides when we build, when we tear down, when we rise up, when we do whatever. Let Him be the one that gets to lead and guide us in our everyday choices of life. Like I said, Lot chose the best green and the beauty, but what he was really choosing for himself was going to become a parched wasteland.
I wonder why Peter said Lot was a good guy.
Yeah, Peter does.
So, what was so good about it?
I'll tell you what, there are times, I often think about that when Peter says that Lot was a righteous man, that makes me very comforted. Because there are times I look in the mirror and I can say, God, what do you see in me? Especially on those days where I have not been living like a Christian. When I've lost my temper or get angry or whatever the case might be. We're all human. And to know that I'm still righteous despite my stupid choices and behaviors and actions is a comfort to me. Well, I think we see this lesson in the New Testament as well when Jesus talks about, don't take the best seat in the house or else, the master's going to come in and move you. And so we should always be willing to take the lesser. Here is where we see in verse 12 that it first says that he pitched his tents near Sodom. Like I said, in progressing chapters, we're seeing that he will slowly get sucked in to the very city itself. Now, verse 13, now I'm going to revisit that all by itself. The men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Bible doesn't tell us what they were doing, at least outside of what we're going to see in the picture of when the angels come. We do have an extra biblical sources that I don't want to quote too much because I don't want to confuse you. And so I'm not going to keep referring to these things all throughout the book of Genesis. But I think there's a little bit of value in just kind of thinking about what was going on in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. We know that it was absolutely wicked. One extra biblical source says that 4 times a year, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah had these festivals where they would go out into the countryside with their wives and daughters and swap wives and daughters. Wife swapping. Which, by the way, goes on today in our society too. Let Sodom and Gomorrah be a lesson to those people. 4 times a year, just at those times when they could turn their eyes away and do whatever they wanted, hedonistically. We also see that there are stories that when poor people would come into town, the whole town was in agreement not to give them food. That we would take them in and kind of basically manipulate them, and then eventually would not even allow them to buy food. Even if they could find some sort of food, nobody would sell it to them, so that what ended up happening is that they would end up starving to death, so that when they died eventually, then they would split up the goods that this person had, even though that wasn't very much. Just evil, just to get chump change. As a matter of fact, one story even says that Eliezer himself went to Sodom and Gomorrah This is Abraham's servant. And Eliezer, being a good man, saw that there was a poor man that had no food and was starving to death, so Eliezer gave him some food. Well, one of the important leaders of the city sees him giving this food to the poor guy, so they go to the judges and they arrest Eliezer, takes him to court. Well, actually, before he takes him to court, the guy picks up a rock and throws it at him, hits Eliezer in the head, and blood flows from his head. And then the guy that threw the rock at him had the gall to come to him and say, "Pay me for letting out your blood." And he says, "What? You hit me in the head with a rock and you expect me to pay you?" He says, "Yeah, that's our custom. For bloodletting here in this town, getting rid of the bad blood, this is the price. Pay me." And Eliezer is like, "I'm not paying you." So they take him to court. And I think they said there were like 5 different judges that were in Sodom. So he goes to the court, and guess what the judge rules? This is the custom of our day. Pay the man. So Eliezer picks up a rock, hits the judge over the head with a rock, and the blood starts flowing. And he says, "If this is the custom of the day, give me my money so that I can give him the money." Okay, again, probably a made-up story. Point is it was absolute ungodliness that was going on. As a matter of fact, we see other stories of women. One of Lot's daughters supposedly then was feeding a poor guy secretly. And they couldn't figure out why this guy wasn't, shriveling away and dying. So they kind of spied out and one day caught her giving money or giving food to this poor man. So they end up burning her to death. There was another one that was recorded, they say, in the city next to Sodom, where another lady did the same thing, and they covered her with honey and then had swarms of bees come all over her. Again, I don't know if any of that happened, but I can tell you this, it wouldn't surprise me one bit. Because what we see happening here in Genesis chapter 19, when we get there, it's hard for even us in our ungodly society to imagine. So a lot of evil was going on. The Bible simply says that they were wicked and sinning greatly against the Lord here. Well, the Jews say that when, in chapter 19, when Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed, Lot leaves with his wife. His wife, supposedly her name may have been Ado or Ado, A-D-O, that she turns around looking because she remembers her daughter. And she's also longing for a daughter that remained in the city. We don't know. There's no indication that his wife was a Christian necessarily. But they say that the reason that Lot's daughters then are going to molest Lot, which is where we get the Moabites and the Ammonites from, is that they thought, because of this great destruction, that they were the only ones left. That this is the last man on earth. Okay, no idea. But this is the wickedness that God is going to destroy. Verse 14, the Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, "Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west." Remember, Lot went east. So that means he's saying, even what I just, you think you gave Lot, I'm giving to you. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. By the way, today we're still in forever. Mike Huckabee, I kind of find that interesting. I don't know if you saw him talking on an interview, basically just saying the land of Judea is the Jews. God gave it to them, and that's a promise that still stands to this day. So, anyway, verse 16, I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. So Abram moved his tents and went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. Boy, you want to talk about patience and faith. Do you know that Abraham, this is a promise given to him? If that God came to me and said, I'm going to give you this and your descendant, I'd be like, wow! Do you know Abraham never saw that? Not in his entire lifetime did he see this promise fulfilled. But he had faith that it would be. That's a good lesson for us right there. As a matter of fact, throughout most of history, his descendants never possessed this land, and yet it says forever. That tells us that God is not finished with that land. That his land, the land of Israel, is still under this promise, under this covenant, and yet many Christians today are denying it, going against it even. I think too many Christians are acting as if the story is over. But this is telling us that this is an ongoing event, an ongoing story. Yeah. You know, in a way, God blesses Abraham's passing the test here, I think. He comes back, he's living by faith, he's not caring about material possessions, and so what God does now is he's going to confirm or reconfirm this covenant to him. And then he's told to walk through the land that has been given to him and his offspring. I love that because it's a command and a promise together. In verse 17 here. Go walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. This is that thing that the church has such a hard time understanding, this connection between works and grace. God always expects us to put our skin in the game. Not to earn something, but to be a part of something. God could easily do so many things. Like the priests, when they were going to cross the Jordan to go into the promised land. He could have dried it up and said, all right, there you go. See that big dry area? Walk. But he waits until the priests, the sole of their feet, touch the water before he stops the water. Time and time again, almost every miracle that we see God doing, he tells his people to go do something first.
Faith and obedience.
Because faith and obedience go hand in hand. You cannot separate them. And the church today has often preached this message of cheap grace that says, oh, you can do nothing. Go live your life, watch the filth on TV, do whatever you want, cuss, swear, tell the dirty jokes. It's okay, you're a believer. You're not under the law. You don't have to do anything. And so we've made it so that there is no part of us. We just sit back, live life, and enjoy the grace of God. Nowhere do we really see that happening. God expected Abraham to live out his faith. If we're sitting back idly and not evangelizing and not living out our faith and not resisting and not being separate, you're not living out your faith. You're living a life for you, and you are living in cheap grace. Yep, it's that, again, it is a cheap grace. Say a prayer, you're in. Doesn't work that way. We do that by taking verses out of context that, like everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Hey, Jesus, okay, you're saved.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. That's not taking the whole scriptures in context and taking them all as a unit. You have to take all of it together. This is the same message we hear in the New Testament. Go. If you love me, do what I say. Okay? If you keep my commandments, I will remain in you, and you will remain in me.
It's conditional? No.
It is conditional. And that is enough to get somebody tarred and feathered in Christianity today. Because they don't understand what conditional means. A covenant, there's two parties here. And this is what we're seeing. Go and walk. You do something. I'm giving it to you. It's by grace. But you have to live it out. You have to accept it. And so it is conditional. God is a gentleman. He doesn't force salvation on you. He says, yeah, you go. You're going to live this life. Yeah, it's yours. I'm giving it to you. But if you have a choice to choose to not live according to my spirit, to live according to the flesh, and forfeit that. Also, verse 18, it says, after this. So Abraham moved his tent to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron. This is all in the past tense. And Mamre is named for the Amorite ally of Abraham that we'll see in Genesis 14:13, who lived here before Abraham came. The fact that it was in Hebron suggests that this is also written after the fact, because at this point Hebron has not yet been built. So we see that in Numbers chapter 13, verse 22. This is written after the fact, looking back when it is called Hebron. The repetition of all these promises also is going to show us that this is Abraham's land, not Lot's. And we are seeing then that he is going to, here in verse 18, go and build an altar again. Really the third altar that we're going to see him building since chapter 12. Seems like every time God comes to him, he builds an altar. Some have suggested it's because every time he's in the presence of God, he realizes, woe is me, I'm not worthy, and he needs to worship and be atoned for. I don't know. I don't think there was any need for that at this point. It's his faith, but bottom line is I can see when we have these spiritual experiences, it draws you closer to him, and you want to get closer to God when he's close to you. And so the Jews would say it is, that if there's an altar, it's a sacrifice. It doesn't have to be, because there are also thank offerings and things like that too, dedications, and so it doesn't have to be. But a lot of the Jews, just by looking at the word altar, think there must have been some sort of sacrifice done. I don't think there has to be. It doesn't mean there couldn't be. A lot of times we put these sacrifices as a Levitical thing. This is how you have to be saved. But you have Cain and Abel, you've got Noah, you've got all these other people doing it before. Burnt offerings, sometimes even of animals, are thank offerings. But did they have an understanding of a picture of redemption of Christ? Possibly, because remember that those things were never to take away sins. It was only to cover them. They were a picture of something that was future. When Leviticus comes, they still know this is a picture of something in the future. It's just that the rule went from the heart now to be written. Now you have to do this.
And they knew it from all that time.
And they knew it the whole time. So it very well could be a sacrifice, but doesn't have to be. Yes, it is a sacrifice of what he has. It's a spiritual act of worship. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, kind of in closing out here, I want to show you that there's a town of Gilgal in Israel. And this one is near Jericho. Some say that there are at least 4, if not 5, Gilgals that have been uncovered in various places in the Jordan Valley. And Gilgal, the word basically seems to kind of like enclose. And you've got these early settlements that were built around this time of Abraham that have these rocks that go around the city to encamp or encircle around it, to Gilgal it. And so whether or not there's 4 or 5 of them, I don't know. All I know is that there are multiple Gilgals that are indeed mentioned in Scripture. So we know there's more than just one. But what I want you to note that some of the people have kind of interpreted is, what does that look like? Looks like a shoe print. And that may have some significance here with Abraham. Here's just kind of a picture of it. This is 8 miles north of Jericho. You can see Jericho kind of off over that hill behind it. Well, Deuteronomy 11:24 says, "Every place on which the sole of your foot treads shall be yours. Your border will be from the wilderness to Lebanon, and from the river Euphrates, as far as the western sea." Remember what God told Abraham. Go walk through the length and the breadth of the land. Some people say that what God was telling him is go claim it. Okay? A name it, claim it theology here. Okay? That wherever you set your foot, that is going to be yours.
It's like the guy that had to hit the ground so many times for...
Yeah, with the arrow to defeat the
Yeah.
Amram or something like that.
Yeah.
The Arameans, maybe it was.
What's this scale of this?
I'll show you some pictures coming up, but it's quite large. I don't know what the exact dimensions would be. I'll show you some people around there. If there was a car on this picture, it would be the tiniest of dots. Let me show you here Joshua 4:18 through 20. It came about when the priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come up from the middle of the Jordan. The soles of the priests' feet were lifted up to the dry ground, that the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and went over all the banks as before. Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern edge of Jericho, this one that I just showed you. Those 12 stones which they had taken from the river were set up here at Gilgal. They left some in the river, and then 12 stones were taken and set up at Gilgal. And there is an altar of stones here at Gilgal. Okay? It says in verse 23, "For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed, just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us, until we had crossed. All the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever." So this is the place, when they're crossing into the promised land, they set up stones to mark this is ours. And it's to be a memorial forever. Here's just an idea of kind of where they're at in location to the land of Israel. Joshua 5:10, "While the sons of Israel camped at Gilgal, they observed the Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the month on the desert plains of Jericho." So this is when they come into the promised land. They celebrate the Passover. This is also the place, Gilgal, where the Gibeonites, they go and trick the Israelites here at Gilgal. They go to, the Gibeonites, here's looking from Jerusalem, there's Gibeon. It's those people who go to Gilgal and say, "Hey, we've traveled a long way, our bread is moldy, make a deal with us." And they make a deal not to destroy them because they've heard the Israelites are coming and they're going to conquer this land that God has given them. And so that happens at Gilgal. It was also the place which Caleb, one of the two faithful spies that Moses sent out to spy out the promised land, he asked Joshua for his portion of the land to be here. In Joshua 14:6 through 9, the sons of Judah drew near to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb said, "You know the word which the Lord spoke to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from there to spy out the land, and brought word back to him as was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt with fear, but I followed the Lord my God fully. So Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land of which your foot has trodden, he spied out, will be an inheritance to you and to your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God fully." So in verse 13, so Joshua blessed him and gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, for an inheritance. The very place that Abraham we're reading about here, going in these chapters. So here is, you can kind of see an outline of where they believe the tabernacle was set up. It fits the dimensions. There's the 12-stone monument that they took out of the Jordan River. And there's a big altar that's there as well. 1 Samuel 7 says, Now Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. He used to go annually on a circuit to Bethel and Gilgal and Mizpah. And he judged Israel in all these places. What a lot of archaeologists are believing is that because God told Moses to go through the land, and all the land that your feet trod upon is going to be yours, that they actually laid out the city in the shape of feet as a way of claiming this is our land.
What
And that
Gilgal actually mean?
A wheel rolling.
wheel rolling and circling, there's different kinds of definitions that it can kind of go off of, but yeah.
Stones.
Well, clearly in the Bible, there are different places because it describes, east of Jericho or other places, and it's different. So we know that there are more than one. But there's debate over how many and all that kind of thing. But it's interesting that the prophet Samuel is visiting here and teaching the Word of God regularly. Why here? It's almost as if these were places that were memorials. The 12 stones were set up there as a memorial forever. That these are places almost like, this is where God first gave us His promise. We're going to make this a place as a remembrance so that you don't forget the promises of God. God gave to Abraham, our forefather, here first. 1 Samuel 11, verses 14 and 15, Samuel said to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there." So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. There they offered sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. So let me show you the size. You may have thought, oh, that's just this little thing. Look at how big it is next to some people here.
They moved those stones.
Okay? It's rather large.
Giants.
It is a central gathering place for the Israelites, as I've shown you here. And I could show you other examples as well. King Saul, his reign over Israel came to an end at Tel Gilgal because of his disobedience in 1 Samuel 13, 8 through 14. Hosea 9:15, all their evil is at Gilgal. Indeed, I came to hate them there because of the wickedness of their deeds. I will drive them out of my house. I will love them no more. All their princes are rebels. Okay, God's pronouncing judgment upon Israel here at Tel Gilgal. Amos 5 says, "For thus says the Lord to the house of Israel, seek me that you may live, but do not resort to Bethel. Do not come to Gilgal, nor cross over to Beersheba. For Gilgal will certainly go into captivity, and Bethel will come to trouble." These are places that are going all the way back to the time of Abraham. It's almost like the judgments. I don't know if you ever remember the Harbinger, where he was talking about the judgments take place where the blessing begins. And we're seeing that same picture here in Scripture. So in Genesis 13, verse 17, when he says, get up, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I give it to you. It seems to be this is the first of where God is giving him the land and telling him wherever you walk, it's yours. Okay? Again, Joshua 1:2, along the same lines, prepare to cross the Jordan together with all this people into the land that I am giving to the Israelites. Every spot on which your foot treads, I give to you, as I promised Moses. Seems like, and as I promised Abraham. So, I bring this up to say this. God has made promises to you. Remember them. Set up a stone memorial in your house, a picture on your wall. I don't care what it is, but don't let the devil steal these promises from you. As I said in our prayer before, I think that I, without knowing it even, allowed the devil to do that the past 4 years of my life. Oh, I knew that the truth was there, but I wasn't living joyfully in it. I wasn't having hope. And let me tell you, if all of a sudden they, don't let Trump get in and World War III breaks out, I want to keep the joy that I have now. Not because of any reason but this. I'm staking claim to His promises. We can stake claim to them. Jamie Walden's message here a couple of weeks ago. What's it called? Help me out, Logan.
Bad Moon Rising.
Bad Moon Rising. Go listen to it.
So what?
So what? Bad Moon Rising. So what? Great message. A great message of hope. I just listened to it today and I thought, man, that fits so well on what I want to talk about here today. Claim it. God says, go, because I have given it to you. God says, go, I have forgiven you. I have given you the Spirit to live in, to walk in, to have joy in. And so now claim it. Don't let it out of your sight, and don't let the devil rob you of that joy. Abraham never got to see it in his lifetime, but let me tell you, Abraham kept the joy throughout his lifetime. The Bible tells us that. He believed throughout his entire life, even though he knew he didn't get to get it now, he was going to get it. That's what I think this chapter ultimately is about. His faith. He's giving Lot, you take whatever you want. Who cares? It doesn't matter. I have all that I need already. When you live your life that way, where it doesn't matter if your house burns down, or if a loved one dies, or if you get cancer, or if the world falls apart and a nuclear bomb hits. Who cares? I have my promises. I have staked my claim. And what is that claim ultimately? Last slide, Galatians 3:29. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed. That means these promises are yours. Heirs according to the promise. Romans 9:8. It is not the natural children who are God's children. It is the children of the promise who are regarded as Abraham's offspring. There you go. Kind of saying that same thing, but again, don't let that pendulum go too far. The natural children, the promise goes to them. It's whether or not they're going to become a child of Abraham or not. Or Romans 4:16, therefore the promise comes by faith, so that it may be by grace and may be guaranteed to all Abraham's offspring. Not only to those who are of the law, that would be the natural ones, the DNA, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham. That would be us. He is the father of us all. Romans 4:18, against all hope, Abraham in hope believed and so became the father of many nations, just as it had been said to him, so shall your offspring be. We are part of the dust of the earth that promise is to in Genesis 14. Don't forget it, claim it, stake it, and don't let the devil rob you of it. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this promise to us. The promise that you have given to our father Abraham. We ask that though we may not see all of these things in our lifetime, we know that we will see them someday. And we ask that you would be with the land of Israel. Lord, that promise is for that land, and it is for your people. And we long for the day that we will be taken there. May you come quickly. But until you do, may we proclaim the victory that we have in Christ. May we proclaim the promises. And may we proclaim your love and the joy that it gives us. In Jesus' name, amen.